"There's no child in there," she said, "and if you're smart, you'll stop listening for one." Silas Reed stood 3 feet from that black iron trunk, and every hair on the back of his neck told him she was lying. The woman he'd married 4 hours ago stood between him and that trunk like a wall calm cold and absolutely certain he would back down. She didn't know him yet. She didn't know that a man who'd spent 11 years alone on a Montana mountain had learned exactly one thing about silence. It always hides something alive. If this story already has you leaning forward, welcome. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that cabin. Back to the night everything changed. The pastor arrived at Silas Reed's door 30 minutes before dark, which was already a bad sign. Pastor Elwood didn't make house calls. He sent letters when he had something to say to Silas, and Silas appreciated that arrangement deeply. The mountain road up to the cabin took 2 hours in good weather, and considerably longer when a man was hauling a woman and an iron trunk behind him in a borrowed wagon. Silas heard the horse before he heard the knock. He set down the rifle he'd been cleaning, pulled on his coat, and opened the door. Pastor Elwood stood on the step with snow in his beard and guilt in his eyes. Behind him, still in the wagon, sat a woman wrapped in a dark wool traveling coat. She wasn't looking at the cabin. She wasn't looking at the pastor. She was looking at the tree line. "Silas," Pastor Elwood said, "I need to ask you something before she comes down." "Then ask." "I need you to marry this woman." Silas looked at the pastor for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman in the wagon. She still hadn't turned her head. "No," Silas said, and started to close the door. "She has nowhere to go." Elwood put his hand on the doorframe. "The boarding house won't take her. The Harmon family turned her away this afternoon. She's been traveling for 6 weeks and she has no money, and winter is coming in fast this year, Silas. You know what that means. It means she needs to get back down the mountain before the road closes." "The road closed this morning." Silas stopped. He looked at the sky. He looked at the clouds sitting low and gray over the ridge. He thought about the temperature drop he'd noticed 3 days ago and told himself he'd imagined it. He hadn't imagined it. "Who is she?" he asked. "Her name is Evelyn Vale. She's from back east. That's all I know." "That's not all you know." Elwood had the decency to look uncomfortable. "She came to me through a church contact in Billings, a pastor I trust. He said she needed distance and time, and that the mountain was the only place left that made sense." He paused. "She won't explain more than that." Silas looked at the woman again. She'd turned her head now and was watching him. Her face was pale composed and completely without warmth, the kind of face that had made a decision a long time ago to stop showing what was underneath. She didn't look frightened. She didn't look hopeful. She looked like someone calculating odds. "She doesn't want to be here," Silas said. "No, she wants to survive. There's a difference." That was the moment something shifted. Silas didn't know what it was at the time. He told himself later it was practical thinking. One more person helped share work through a hard winter, and Lord knew the cabin had space. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way she was looking at him. Straight, unflinching, like she was already deciding whether he was a threat. He hadn't had anyone look at him that way in a long time. "Fine," he said. "Bring her in." The wedding took 11 minutes. Pastor Elwood read from the book. Silas stood on one side of the fireplace and Evelyn Vale stood on the other. She'd taken off her traveling coat. Beneath it, she wore a plain dark dress that had been mended in at least 3 places. Her dark hair was pulled back severely. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she didn't fidget once. When Elwood asked her to repeat the vows, she did it without hesitation and without expression. When Elwood asked Silas, he said them quietly, watching her face. She didn't look at him once during the entire ceremony. Elwood pressed their hands together at the end, said a short prayer, and then immediately began gathering his coat and hat with the urgency of a man who wanted to be somewhere else. "I'll be back up in spring," he said. "God willing, you two take care of each other." He was gone in 4 minutes. Silas stood in his own cabin listening to the wagon pull away down the road and felt the particular silence of a man who had just done something irreversible. Evelyn was standing at the window watching the wagon disappear. "You can have the bedroom," Silas said. "I'll sleep near the fire." "That's not necessary." "It is to me." A pause. "All right." "You hungry?" "Yes." He put a pot on. She sat down at the table without being asked, which told him she wasn't the kind of woman who waited to be told where to stand. He moved around the kitchen, and she watched him without watching him, the kind of observation that looks like staring at nothing but takes in everything. The trunk sat near the door where the pastor's hired man had left it. It was black iron banded with leather straps about the size of a blanket chest. It had 2 separate padlocks on it. The leather was worn thin in places like it had been handled and shifted constantly for a long time. Silas set a bowl on the table and sat down across from her. "What's in the trunk?" he asked. She didn't stop eating. "My belongings. Both locks. I travel through rough country." "You came from Billings on a pastor's voucher. That's not rough country." She looked up at him for the first time since the ceremony. Her eyes were dark gray, and there was something in them that was working very hard at being nothing. "My belongings," she said again. "And my business." Silas ate his stew. "Fair enough." After dinner, she washed her own bowl without being asked. Then she said goodnight, picked up a small bag she'd kept separate from the trunk, and went into the bedroom. Silas banked the fire, rolled out his blankets, and lay down. He was almost asleep when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind. The Bitterroot Mountains had a particular kind of wind in early winter that came through the pine breaks and made sounds that weren't quite right. Sounds that sat somewhere between human and not. He'd lived here long enough that he didn't flinch at it anymore. But this wasn't wind. It was muffled, faint, and brief, and it came from the direction of the trunk. He lay still for a long time. The sound didn't repeat. In the morning, he told himself he'd imagined it. 3 days passed. Evelyn Vale worked. That was the first thing Silas understood about her. She was not a woman who sat still. By the second morning, she had taken stock of the entire cabin, reorganized the pantry shelving in a way that made significantly more sense than what he'd had mended 2 pairs of his work socks without comment, and hauled 3 loads of firewood from the stack outside. When he came in from checking his trap lines to find her splitting kindling on the porch with clean, efficient strokes, he stopped walking. She noticed him staring. "I'm useful," she said flatly. "I would appreciate if you noticed that more than you noticed the trunk." "I wasn't." "You were. You have been." She set down the axe. "I'm not a charity case, Mr. Reed. I'm a working arrangement. I'll keep your house, preserve your food, and share your roof. That's the arrangement. The trunk is mine." He looked at her for a moment. "Silas." "What?" "Not Mr. Reed. Silas." Something moved across her face. Almost nothing. "Silas," she said. He nodded and went inside. That night he heard it again. Not wind. A sound from the trunk. Faint, and then gone. Gone so fast he couldn't be certain. He lay in the dark, counting the seconds after it stopped, and got to 47 before he closed his eyes. On the 4th day, she asked him a question that didn't fit. They were sitting at opposite ends of the table after dinner, Silas looking at a map of his trapping routes, and Evelyn mending a tear in the curtain with small precise stitches, and she said without looking up, "Do you get riders up here much? Even in winter?" He set down his pencil. "No. Road closes first heavy snow. Nobody comes up that doesn't live here." "Nobody at all. Once in a great while someone comes through on horseback who doesn't know the route. They don't usually make it past the eastern ridge." He watched her hands. They hadn't slowed. "Why? I like to know the geography of a place." "You're asking about riders, not geography." "A beat. I like to know both." Silas leaned back in his chair. "Evelyn, if someone is looking for you, I should know." She looked up. Those gray eyes again measured careful and carrying something heavy behind them that she absolutely refused to put down. "No one is looking for me," she said. She went back to her stitching. He watched the trunk in the corner for a long moment. "All right," he said. The first real trouble came on the 6th night. Silas woke to silence so complete it was wrong. When you've lived in mountains long enough, you learn the texture of quiet. There's the quiet of nothing happening. And then there's the quiet of something waiting. They feel different the way a still pond feels different from still air. One has depth, one doesn't. This quiet had depth. He was on his feet and reaching for his rifle before he was fully awake. He moved to the window. Dark outside, clear sky, moon bright on the snow. Nothing on the tree line. Nothing near the water barrel. Nothing. The bedroom door opened behind him. Evelyn stood in the doorway in her dark dress with her hair loose and a small pistol held down at her side in her right hand. He stared at the pistol. "You sleep with that," he said. "I sleep with that." "Where did you?" "I brought it. I have 2 others." She was looking past him out the window, scanning the tree line the same way he had. "What did you hear?" "Nothing. That's the problem." She nodded slowly. The pistol didn't come up, but it didn't go away either. "The horses," she said. "Are they settled?" "I'll check." "I'll come." He looked at her. "You don't need." "I'll come." They went out together into the cold. The horses were unsettled, shifting in the small shelter he'd built against the east side of the cabin, not panicked, but alert, heads up, ears tracking something Silas couldn't hear yet. He moved between them, quieting them with his hands. Evelyn stood at the edge of the shelter and looked north. "Mountain lion?" he asked. "Possibly." She didn't sound like she believed it. What else would it be? She was quiet for long enough that the answer became its own kind of answer. They went back inside. Silas barred the door. Evelyn went to the bedroom doorway and stopped. "You're going to want to know," she said, still facing away from him. "I understand that. I'm asking you to wait a little longer." "How much longer?" "Until I know you won't make a decision I can't undo." He turned that over in his mind. What kind of decision? The kind that gets someone hurt who doesn't deserve to be hurt. She turned then, just enough to look at him over her shoulder. "You don't know me yet, Silas, but I am telling you right now, there is nothing in this cabin that will harm you. I give you my word, and I don't give my word about things I'm not certain of." He held her gaze for a long moment. "2 more days," he said. She gave him one sharp nod and went into the bedroom. He sat down in the chair nearest the fire and didn't sleep again until dawn. On the 7th morning, she made a mistake. It was small, the kind of mistake that only happens when someone is exhausted, past the point of perfect control. She'd been awake most of the night, he could tell by the shadows under her eyes, and the way she was moving with the deliberate care of someone keeping themselves upright through willpower alone. She was pouring coffee at the stove with her back to him when a sound came from the trunk. Not a muffle, not a shift of weight. A word. One word, small and muffled through iron and distance, but unmistakable to a man sitting 6 feet away in a quiet cabin. "Mama!" Evelyn's hand clenched on the coffee pot. The sound stopped immediately. Silas sat completely still. He watched her shoulders, watched the breath she took that was carefully, precisely, absolutely controlled. Then she turned around and set his coffee on the table without meeting his eyes. "Evelyn," he said, "it's not. Don't." His voice came out quiet, not angry, something past anger that had landed somewhere harder. "Don't tell me there's nothing in there. I heard it. You heard it. We both know what it was." She stood at the edge of the table. Something moved through her face that she didn't entirely stop, a fracture of something just for a second. Not guilt, closer to grief. "Sit down," Silas said. "Please." She sat down. He didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the pines in long, low pulls, and the fire was burning well and the cabin was warm. "How old?" he said finally. She looked at the table. 5 years. "His name?" "Noah." "Is he yours?" Something crossed her face. "He is now." She looked up. "Whatever I tell you, whatever you decide, he is not going back. I need you to understand that before I say anything else. I need to know that is not on the table. Tell me the rest first." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she pushed back her chair, walked to the trunk, and undid both padlocks with keys she wore around her neck. She lifted the lid. Silas stood up slowly. Inside the trunk, curled on a folded blanket with a small cloth rabbit tucked under his chin, was a boy. Dark hair. Pale skin. Eyes closed, breathing steady, apparently actually asleep. Small enough to fit easily in the space, though the way he was arranged. Pillow positioned just so. Blanket tucked carefully around his small feet, told Silas everything he needed to know about how much care had been taken. The boy opened his eyes. He looked at Silas. Silas had never in his adult life felt the particular sensation of a child's gaze hit him in the chest like that. The boy's eyes were dark and very serious and held the particular quality of a child who had learned too young to assess whether a new face meant safety or danger. He assessed Silas for 3 long seconds. Then he looked at Evelyn. "It's all right," Evelyn said softly. "Come out, sweetheart." Noah climbed out of the trunk. He stood between it and Evelyn, his rabbit tucked against his chest, still watching Silas. Silas crouched down to eye level. "Hey there." Noah said nothing. "My name's Silas. This is my cabin." Nothing. "You hungry?" A beat, the smallest nod. "All right." Silas straightened up. "I've got biscuits from this morning. They're probably still warm." He went to the kitchen. Behind him he heard Evelyn exhale for what sounded like the first time in 7 days. He put biscuits and butter on a plate and set them on the table. Noah came and sat down carefully and ate with the focused attention of a child who'd spent time not knowing when the next meal was coming. Silas sat down across from Evelyn. "Tell me," he said. "Reed," she told him. "Not everything, not all at once, but enough." She had worked as a governess in a large house in the Virginia countryside, a house belonging to a man named Senator Aldrich Kane, a man whose name appeared in newspapers as a champion of Western expansion and whose name appeared in other documents. Documents Evelyn had found by accident in a filing cabinet she wasn't supposed to open as something considerably darker. Land seizures, federal contracts awarded through fraud, and a series of correspondence referring to a settlement of immigrant families, Poles, Germans, Italians who had been living and farming on land the railroad wanted. The correspondence was clinical and calm, and discussed the removal of those settlers with the same tone a man might use when discussing the removal of tree stumps. They had not been relocated. The word used in the last letter, the one Evelyn had held in her shaking hands in that silent study, was resolved. "I didn't understand at first," she said quietly. "I thought it was legal language. Then I found the burial records." She paused. 341 people. Noah had fallen asleep at the table with his head on his folded arms. Evelyn reached over and adjusted the blanket she'd put around his shoulders. "Noah's mother was one of Senator Kane's household staff," she continued. "She'd been there for years. She was not a willing participant in whatever arrangement existed between her and the senator." Her voice stayed flat, but her jaw tightened. "When Noah was born, the senator's wife demanded she leave. She left. 6 months later, she was dead. The official story was fever." "And you think—" "I don't think. I have the letters." She looked up. She'd written to Kane asking for money for the child. He'd written back. The last letter was dated 2 weeks before her death. Silas was quiet. "I took Noah when they came to put him in the state home. I took the documents, and then I ran." She looked at the boy sleeping at her table. I've been running for 14 months. Silas stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the snow was coming down harder now. The kind of steady, committed snowfall that meant the road wasn't reopening for weeks. "The riders," he said. "The quiet you were listening for. They've found me twice before. Once in Kansas, once in Colorado." She paused. "They weren't lawmen. Bounty men." "Yes." He turned around. "What do the documents prove exactly? Enough to destroy him? Enough to open a federal investigation into the land contracts, the settlement clearing the murder arrangements?" She held his gaze. "Enough to put a very powerful man in a very serious position, which means the documents are worth more than both our lives. And you've been carrying them in the trunk. Under the false bottom, yes." Silas looked at the boy sleeping at his table, at the small rabbit still tucked under his arm, even in sleep. At the way Evelyn was watching Noah with an expression she didn't know she was making. Not the controlled, composed face she wore when she was thinking, but something stripped and raw and old. "You love him," Silas said. She looked up. "That wasn't a question," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "All right," Silas said. She frowned. "All right what?" "All right, you're here, he's here. Winters close the road." He picked up his coffee. "In the spring we figure out what to do with the documents. Until then, no one's coming up this mountain that I don't know about." He paused. "And the trunk stays open." Something moved through her face. Not relief exactly. Something that had been wound very tight for a very long time, loosening one small degree. "Thank you," she said, quietly. Like the words weren't ones she used often. "Don't thank me yet." He looked toward the window. "Spring's a long way off." Outside, the snow fell and fell, and the mountain closed in around them. And somewhere below the tree line, if you knew how to read the silence, you could feel something else closing in too. Something patient. Something that had been following Evelyn Vale for 14 months and had not stopped yet. And Silas Reed, who had lived alone on this mountain for 11 years, who had told himself every single one of those years that he had nothing left worth protecting, set down his coffee and looked at the sleeping boy and the pale, exhausted woman who had carried him here through half the country, and felt for the first time in a very long time the particular weight of something that mattered. Noah woke up before dawn the next morning and immediately looked for Evelyn. He didn't call for her, he just sat up at the table where he'd fallen asleep. Looked around the cabin with those serious dark eyes, found her rolled in a blanket near the fire, and lay his head back down. Like checking a door was latched, like making sure she hadn't disappeared in the night. Silas had been awake already. He'd watched the whole thing from his chair without moving. When Evelyn opened her eyes an hour later, she looked at Noah first too. He didn't know what to do with that two people who'd learned to count each other before they counted anything else. He got up and put the coffee on and didn't say anything about it. Breakfast was quiet. Noah ate with the focused determination of a small person taking nothing for granted. Evelyn drank her coffee standing up, which Silas figured was a habit built from years of needing to be ready to move. He slid a plate of cornbread toward her without comment, and she sat down eventually, which he counted as progress. "He doesn't talk much," Silas said, nodding toward Noah. "He talks," Evelyn said. "When he decides to." "What does he decide on?" She glanced at the boy. "Things he's already sure about." Silas looked at Noah. Noah looked back at him steadily, cornbread in both hands, rabbit on the bench beside him. "You always carry that rabbit?" Silas asked. Noah looked at the rabbit, then back at Silas. "His name is Captain." "Good name." "He was brave once." Silas kept his face neutral. "What happened?" "He got scared for a while." Noah looked at the rabbit again with an expression that was about 40 years too old for his face. "But he's getting better." Evelyn was looking at her coffee. Silas picked up his own cup and didn't push further. Some things didn't need pushing. Some things just needed room. The first full week passed in a careful, watchful rhythm. Silas kept his trap lines. Evelyn kept the cabin. Noah stayed close to whichever one of them was inside, trailing around the kitchen or sitting near Silas's chair, watching him work on equipment, with the particular intensity of a child cataloging everything in case it becomes important later. On the third day, Noah asked Silas what he was fixing. "Snowshoe binding," Silas said. "It broke on the north ridge." "How did it break?" "Ice got in the leather joint and expanded. Cracked the frame." Noah thought about this. "Does everything break when it gets cold?" Silas looked at him. "Most things get harder in the cold, stronger even. But if the wrong part freezes, yeah, it breaks." Noah nodded like he was filing that away. That evening, Silas mentioned it to Evelyn. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "His mother told him cold things don't break." She was trying to comfort him. A pause. "He's been thinking about that ever since." Silas didn't answer. He didn't know what to say to that. But something about it sat in his chest for the rest of the night. On the 9th day, Evelyn made a decision that Silas didn't expect. He came in from the trap lines early. The weather had shifted, and he didn't like what the sky was saying, and found her standing at the table with the false bottom of the trunk lifted out and the documents spread across the wood in careful, organized rows. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. "I need to go through them. I haven't been able to in months. There was never enough safety to think clearly." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I'm doing." He took off his coat. "All right." She paused like she'd prepared for more resistance. "All right. You said you'd tell me what's in them when you were ready. You're ready. I'll leave you to it. I'd rather you stayed." She said it quickly like she'd almost talked herself out of it. "Someone else should know what these say, in case—" She stopped. "In case something happens to you," he said. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. He sat down across from her. What she laid out over the next 2 hours was not a single smoking gun document. It was worse than that. It was a systematic record letters, ledger entries, surveying contracts, a series of communications between Senator Aldrich Kane and 2 men named Pruitt and Holden, who appeared to operate as his private enforcers. The land clearances were documented in the same detached administrative language that bureaucracies use when they want decisions to look like logistics. 341 settlers, 12 homesteads, 4 separate operations spanning 8 years, and then a final folder. Evelyn placed it in the center of the table. "This is the part that's different," she said. Inside were 2 letters and a birth record. The birth record listed Noah's mother, Marta Elise Sauer, born in Frankfurt, Germany, arrived in Virginia in 1876. And below that, Noah's full name as registered at birth, Noah Elias Sauer Reed. Silas felt the word before he understood it. Reed. "That's my name," he said. "Yes." He looked up from the document. Evelyn's face was perfectly still and absolutely sorry. "Noah's mother listed his father on the birth record," she said. "She was honest even when she had no reason to be, even when it was dangerous to be." She paused. "The father listed is Thomas Reed, Virginia service record discharged 1879. Known family, 1 brother, Montana Territory." The room was very quiet. Silas looked at the paper for a long time. Long enough that the words stopped being words and became something else, a shape, a thing with weight, a fact that had been sitting in a folder in a dead woman's history while he spent 11 years on a mountain not knowing it existed. "Thomas," he said. "Your brother. He's been gone since—" He stopped. "Since 81. He went east looking for work after the mining company folded. I got 2 letters in the first year, and then nothing." His voice stayed flat, but something in his jaw wasn't. "I figured he'd built a new life and moved on from the mountain." "He didn't move on," Evelyn said quietly. "He died. I found a death record in the same file. Influenza 1882. He'd been living in the Virginia counties for about 2 years." A pause. "He and Marta were together. From what I could piece together from her letters, they were making plans. But he died before Noah was born. Silas set the paper down with care. Noah was in the other room asleep in the proper bed Evelyn had moved him to 3 nights ago when she'd decided the trunk was no longer necessary for hiding. Silas could hear the particular rhythm of a sleeping child, slow and even and completely trusting. Thomas's son, his brother's child. "How long have you known this?" he asked. "Since Kansas," Evelyn said. "When I was going through the documents for the first time after I ran." She held his gaze and didn't look away from what she saw there. "I didn't know if I could trust you. I didn't know if it would make things better or worse. I didn't know—" She stopped, and when she started again, her voice was lower. "I have made decisions for 14 months with no room for error and no one to share the weight with, and I have been wrong before. I was trying not to be wrong about this. You should have told me." "Yes," she said. "I should have." No excuse, no softening, just acknowledgement. Silas stood up. He walked to the window and stood there for a long time. She didn't fill the silence, and he was grateful for it. Thomas. 22 years old the last time Silas had seen him, laughing, restless, already planning his exit from the mountain. Already talking about what came next. Silas had watched him ride east and thought, he'll do better than I did. He'll build something real. He had. He just hadn't lived long enough to see it. "He never knew," Silas said. "Marta wrote that he died 2 months before Noah was born. She never had the chance to tell him." Evelyn's voice was steady and careful. "She kept everything. Every letter he wrote her. She was that kind of woman from what I could see in her things." "What kind?" "The kind who keeps things because she believes they matter. Because she believes people matter." A pause. She was right. Silas turned around. Noah was standing in the bedroom doorway in his nightshirt with Captain the Rabbit in his arms. Blinking sleep from his eyes, clearly wakened by voices. He looked at Silas. Silas looked at him. His brother's face wasn't in the boy's. Noah had his mother's coloring and his mother's serious eyes. But something else was there. Something in the set of the jaw, the way the boy stood his ground without being told to. Something that Silas recognized the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. Not from the melody, from what it does to your chest. "Did I do something wrong?" Noah asked. "No," Silas said. "Go back to sleep. You look like something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong." Silas crossed the room and crouched down in front of him. "I just found out some news. Good news. Took me by surprise is all." Noah studied his face with that unsettling precision. "What kind of good news?" Silas looked at him for a moment. "The kind that means you belong here, more than either of us knew." Noah considered this. Then he looked at Evelyn. "Did you know?" he asked her. "Yes," she said. "Were you going to tell him?" "I just did." Noah looked at Silas again. Back at Evelyn. Whatever calculation he was running in that small head of his reached its conclusion, and he nodded once, like a man closing a ledger. "Okay," he said, and went back to bed. That should have been the night things eased. Instead, it was the night Silas found the horse tracks. He'd gone out before dawn to check the water barrel and reset the heavy door latch that kept working loose in the cold, and the snow had come down soft and steady through the night, the kind that preserved everything it covered like pressed paper. And there, along the north edge of the property, where the tree line met the cleared ground, a set of prints. Single rider. Stopped. Stood still long enough that the horse had shifted weight twice, leaving 2 overlapping patterns. Then turned around and went back into the trees. Silas looked at the tracks for a long time in the gray pre-dawn light. He went inside. Evelyn was at the stove. She looked at his face and set down the spoon. "What?" she said. "Single rider. North tree line. Sometime in the last few hours." She was very still. "How far from the cabin?" 40 yards. "They didn't approach?" "No. They were looking," she said. "Counting windows. checking access. She looked at the door, then back at him. How did they get up the mountain? You said the road. There's another way. Takes twice as long, and you need to know it exists. He looked at her. I know 2 people who know it. One of them is dead. The other is me. Then someone told them. Or they found it. She moved to the window. How long before they come back with more? If they rode out last night, they're most of a day back down. Could be 2 days. Could be less if they pushed hard. He paused. Evelyn, how many men does this senator send? She turned from the window. Last time in Colorado there were 4. The time before that 6. She held his gaze. He doesn't send men he can't afford to lose. He sends men who won't stop. Names Pruitt and Holden. Pruitt is dead, I'm fairly certain. Colorado. She said it without flinching. Holden is not. Silas moved to the rifle cabinet. Tell me about Holden. Methodical. Experienced. He was a Pinkerton man before Kane hired him away. She paused. He's not stupid, and he's not cruel for the sake of it. He's professional, which is worse. It means he finishes what he starts. Silas checked the rifle. Checked the load, set it on the table. Pulled the second one down. Can you shoot? He asked. She gave him a look. Right, he said. I reloaded under fire in Colorado, she said. I can shoot. What about a rifle, or just the pistols? Both. She paused. I'm better at close range. All right. He was already thinking through the cabin, the angles, the positions. Noah? He stays inside, no matter what. Her voice was absolute on that point. Agreed. He looked at her. The documents. We need a better location than the trunk. She nodded. I've been thinking about that. There's a compartment under the floorboard in the back corner. I put it in when I first built the place. Old habit. He looked at her steadily. Nobody knows it's there. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite surprise, but close. You built a hide. I've had things worth hiding before. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. Old life. Different story. She didn't press. She filed it. He could tell by the way she didn't ask, not because she didn't want to know, but because she understood that everyone standing in this cabin right now had a history they were carrying, and the mountain had enough weight already. They moved the documents that morning while Noah was occupied with breakfast. Rolled and wrapped in oilskin, packed into the hollow under the floorboard board replaced, and the braided rug drawn back over it. Silas looked at the floor. You couldn't tell. If something happens to me, he said, nothing is going to happen to you. If it does, lift the rug at the far corner of the back room. The board has a notch on the left side. He looked at her. You make sure those documents reach a federal judge. Not local. Federal. Someone Kane can't reach. I know the difference, she said quietly. I know you do. He picked up his coat. She was watching him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the calculated assessment she usually wore, and not the stripped-down grief she sometimes couldn't keep off her face when she looked at Noah. This was something different. Something that had to do with him specifically, and she wasn't sure what to do with it. Silas, she said. He stopped. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Noah sooner. She meant it simply and directly the way she did most things. You deserve to know from the beginning. You were protecting him, he said. You didn't know me. I know you now. He held that for a moment. Yeah, he said. You do. He went outside to study the tree line and think about what 2 days might mean. Noah found out about the riders in the way that children find out things adults are trying to keep from them by paying attention to the things adults do instead of what they say. He came to Silas that afternoon while Evelyn was reorganizing the pantry with the focused energy of someone who needed to do something with her hands. Are we in danger? Noah asked. Silas looked down at him. The boy was standing straight rabbit at his side, watching him with those serious eyes that had seen too much and processed all of it. Lying to him, Silas decided, was not something this child would accept, and it probably wasn't something he deserved. Maybe, Silas said, from the men who've been chasing us. You knew about that. I'm 5, Noah said. Not blind. He paused. Evelyn thought I was asleep in Kansas. You weren't. I never am when it matters. He looked down at Captain for a moment, then back up. Are you going to make them go away? Silas crouched down to his level. That's the plan. Do you know how? I know this mountain better than anyone alive, Silas said. And I've been making things go away up here for 11 years. He held the boy's gaze steadily. You let me worry about the outside. Your job is to stay inside and listen to Evelyn. Can you do that? Noah thought about it with the seriousness he gave everything. Yes. Good. The boy started to turn away, then stopped. Silas? Yeah. She carries everything by herself because she doesn't think anyone will stay. He said it simply factually, the way children state things that adults spend years dancing around. I just thought you should know that. Silas looked at him for a long moment. I'm staying, he said. Noah nodded, tucked his rabbit under his arm, went back inside. Silas stood in the cold and listened to the mountain and thought about a 22-year-old boy who'd ridden east laughing and a woman who'd run across half a country with a dead man's child in an iron trunk, and the particular kind of courage it takes to carry someone else's life when you've barely got a grip on your own. He thought about the tracks in the snow. He thought about what 2 days meant and what he was going to do with them. And somewhere below the tree line, further down the mountain than Silas could see or hear, a man named Holden made a camp in the cold and looked up at the smoke rising from the cabin and thought with the patient professional certainty of a man who had finished every job he'd started. There is no place left for them to run. Holden arrived on the second day exactly when Silas expected him, not at the front, not up the road. He came from the East Ridge, which meant he knew the mountain better than Silas had hoped, or he'd found someone who did. 5 horses. 5 men. Moving in a spread formation that told Silas everything he needed to know about their training, these weren't hired thugs from a saloon. These were men who knew what they were doing and had done it before. Silas watched them from the high point above the cabin flat on his stomach in the snow and counted them twice. 5. He went back down. Evelyn was at the table when he came in, cleaning the pistol she kept at her right hip with the practiced ease of someone who had done it so many times. The motion lived in her hands rather than her head. Noah was in the back room. The door was closed, and Silas had already explained to him calmly, directly, without softening it, that when that door was closed, it stayed closed, and the boy had nodded with that ancient seriousness and gone in without argument. 5, Silas said. Evelyn's hands didn't stop moving. Holden. One of them moves like a man in charge. Yes. Armed. Rifles, sidearms. One of them is carrying something I couldn't identify from the ridge. He pulled off his outer coat. They're not moving fast. They know they've got us contained. They think they do, she said. He looked at her. They do. Road's closed. There's nowhere to go that isn't through them or over the northern pass, and that pass kills people in January. She set the pistol down. Then we don't run. No, he said. We don't. She looked at him steadily. What do you need me to do? Tell me everything Holden doesn't know about himself. The things that make him predictable. She thought for a moment. He doesn't improvise. He sets a plan and executes it. In Colorado, he had 3 exit strategies mapped before he made first contact. I found the notes afterward. He's thorough, which means he's slow. She paused. He also doesn't like fire. He lost a partner in a building fire years back. He avoids enclosed burning spaces. I don't know why I know that something one of his men said in passing before he knew I was listening. Silas nodded. He was already building something in his head, not a defense exactly. Something more like a conversation with the mountain, using what the mountain knew and what Holden didn't. If we can split them, Silas said, Break the formation before they reach the cabin, the mountain does the rest. The snow on the north cliff, she said immediately. He stopped. You notice that? I notice everything. The overhang above the north approach has been loading for 2 weeks. Any significant impact vibration? She met his eyes. You'd thought of it already. I'd thought of it. Then why did you look surprised? Because most people don't think that way. She picked the pistol back up. Most people haven't had 14 months of practice. Yes, they had 4 hours before the light started to fade, which was when Holden would move. Silas knew that because it was what he would do. Use the dusk. Use the disorientation of lowering light push for the cabin when the occupants were caught between lamp lighting and dark adjustment. He spent 2 of those hours on the mountain. He knew every loose point, every natural choke, every place where the terrain funneled movement. He rigged nothing elaborate, no traps that required timing or luck. He cut a series of decisions into the snow and rock pathways that looked like the safest route in, and weren't approaches that appeared open but ended in dead ground, where a man on foot was exposed and a man on a horse was worse. He worked with the mountain the way he'd worked it for 11 years, the way it had taught him to work it not against it, but inside it, reading it, using its own logic. When he came back, Evelyn was standing in the doorway, watching the tree line. Noah, he asked. Back room. He hasn't opened the door once. She paused. He asked me before I closed it whether you'd come back. What did you tell him? I told him yes. She glanced at him sideways. Don't make me wrong. He almost said something. Instead, he checked the rifle and set himself near the front wall. Holden's men came out of the tree line at dusk, which was exactly when Silas expected, and they split into 2 groups almost immediately, which was also exactly what he expected, which was why the left side approach had been made to look significantly more accessible than the right. 3 went left, 2 went right, Holden among them. Silas watched the 3 on the left from the high window and waited. It took 4 minutes. He heard the moment they hit the dead ground, the change in the horse's movement, the sudden stop voices he couldn't make out, but could read by their urgency. They'd hit the narrow shelf he'd blocked with packed snow and couldn't see past it in the dusk. Not trapped, but stopped. Confused. Having to backtrack. 2 minutes of confusion was 2 minutes he could use. He looked at Evelyn. Left group is stalled. Holden's coming straight. How close? 200 yards. She moved to the left side of the cabin wall. He moved to the right. Neither of them spoke. This was the part where words ran out, and what was left was just what a person was made of. And he'd learned in the last 2 weeks exactly what Evelyn Vale was made of, and he wasn't worried about her. He was worried about a lot of things. She wasn't one of them. A voice came from outside. Reed, flat-carrying professional. Holden's voice had the sound of a man who had called out to people in similar situations many times and was bored by the formality of it. My name is James Holden. I have a federal warrant for the woman inside. Send her out and the boy stays with you. That's the offer. Silas called back, Show me the warrant. A pause. I'll show it to you when you open the door. You'll show it to me now or you'll stand there in the cold. Another pause longer. Holden wasn't used to the formality being returned in kind. The warrant is legal. The woman is wanted for kidnapping. The child belongs to his father. His father is dead, Silas said. Silence. His father's family, then, Holden said. They have rights to the child. They do. I'm his father's family. Silas kept his voice even. His father was my brother. So unless you've got a judge's signature that overwrites blood, you're on the wrong mountain, Mr. Holden. The silence this time had a different texture, not strategic, but genuine. Holden hadn't known that. Silas could feel it in the length of the pause. That's a claim, Holden said finally. Not a fact. I have the birth record, Silas said. Registered in Virginia, 1882. You want to argue about it, send for a judge. Until then, you're trespassing. Holden didn't answer right away. In the pause, Silas heard the left group working their way back through the snow, repositioning slower now, less certain of their footing. "The woman," Holden said. "She took documents that belong to a United States senator. That supersedes whatever family arrangement you think you have. She took evidence of 341 murders," Silas said. "You want to call that theft, that's your business. But I'd think hard about which side of that you want to stand on when it reaches a federal court." He heard movement outside, not coming closer. Holden was reassessing. Then Evelyn spoke. She raised her voice and aimed it through the wall like a rifle. "Holden." A pause. "I know about Denver. I know what Pruitt told you before Colorado, and I know what the senator promised you afterward. I kept records of that too. You want to walk away from this mountain tonight, that information stays with me. You want to push it goes to the same judge as everything else." Dead silence. "She's bluffing," Holden said. But he said it to his own man, not to her, and Silas heard it anyway. "Am I?" Evelyn called back. 30 seconds of nothing. Then Holden's voice again, and this time the professional calm had a hairline fracture in it. "I'll need the night to verify your claim about the child." "You can have the night," Silas said. "You can have all the nights you want. Come back with a federal judge and I'll open my door. Come back without one and you'll get the same answer you're getting now." Hoofbeats. Moving away. Silas didn't move from the wall until he couldn't hear them anymore. Then he exhaled slowly. "Denver," he said. "A guess," Evelyn said from across the room. Her voice was steady, but her hands, when she lowered the pistol, had the faintest tremor. "I heard Pruitt mention it once. I don't actually know what happened there." Silas looked at her. "You bluffed a Pinkerton man with a guess. I bluffed a man who knew he'd done something wrong with the suggestion that I knew what it was." She set the pistol on the table. "People fill in their own guilt better than any real accusation could." He stared at her for a moment. "That worked tonight," he said. "It won't work twice." "I know." She met his eyes. "We have tonight." The backroom door opened and Noah stood in it with Captain under his arm and the particular expression of a 5-year-old who had heard everything and was waiting to see if the adults would pretend otherwise. "Are they gone?" he asked. "For now," Silas said. Noah looked at Evelyn, at Silas. He came into the room, walked to the table, and sat down in his chair like he was taking his seat at a meeting. "Tell me the real plan," Noah said. Silas opened his mouth. "Don't say stay inside," Noah said. "It's part of the real plan," Silas said. "What's the rest?" Silas looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him with an expression that said, "He's right. He deserves to know, and also this is your problem to navigate." "The rest," Silas said carefully, "involves the mountain doing most of the work." "The north overhang," Noah said. Both adults went still. "I heard you talking," Noah said unapologetically. "The overhang above the north approach. What happens if it comes down?" Silas studied him. "It blocks the approach, completely, buries everything in that corridor under about 8 feet of packed snow. And the men, if they're on the approach when it comes down, they don't come back up," Noah said. Silas didn't answer. Noah was quiet for a moment, processing with that unnervingly mature deliberation. "Silas, is that something you want to do?" It was such a direct question, so stripped of any childish framing, that it landed somewhere Silas hadn't expected. "No," he said honestly. "It's something I'll do if I have to." Noah nodded slowly. "Okay." He looked at Evelyn. "What do you want me to do if they come inside?" "They will not come inside," she said. "What if they do?" "Noah, Evelyn?" He looked at her with that face that was entirely too old. "What do you want me to do?" She held his gaze for a long moment. When she answered, her voice was very quiet. "There's a space behind the rear wall panel in the back room. Silas built it. It's big enough for you. You go in there, you pull the panel closed, and you do not make a sound until either Silas or I open it from the outside. You hear another voice, anyone else you stay silent. You understand? Yes. Promise me. I promise. He paused. But you both come back. That's the plan, Silas said. Noah accepted this. He stood up, picked up his rabbit, and went back toward the room. At the door he stopped. Silas. Yeah. My father, your brother, what was he like? The question hit without warning. Silas felt it move through him like something physical. Stubborn, he said after a moment. Funny when he wanted to be. Braver than was smart sometimes. He paused. He would have been a good father. Noah stood very still. Would he have liked Evelyn? Silas looked at Evelyn across the room. She was looking at the floor. Yeah, Silas said. He would have thought she was the most remarkable person he'd ever met. Noah seemed to weigh this carefully. Then he looked at Evelyn directly. I think so too, he said, and went in the room and closed the door. The night that followed was the longest of Silas's 11 years on the mountain, and that was saying something. They didn't sleep. They traded watch positions through the dark hours, one at the window, while the other rested with eyes open and hands ready. Around 2 in the morning, Silas heard movement at the eastern edge of the property, not organized, not an approach, but someone probing, testing. Holden checking whether they'd relaxed. Silas fired once into the air. Silence. Then retreat. He's not going to wait for a judge, Evelyn said when he came back inside. No. He's going to try before dawn, when we're tired and the light's wrong. I know. She was sitting at the table with her hands flat on the wood, not anxious past anxiety into something harder and cleaner. Then we need to move before he does. Silas looked at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that the north overhang works if they're committed to that approach, but they're not committed yet. They'll probe from 2 sides simultaneously. She tapped the table. If we give them a reason to commit to the north... Bait, he said. I go out, she said. I move visible north side. Make them think we're attempting the pass. They'll redirect to cut me off all 5 of them, because Holden will know that if I reach the pass with the documents he's finished, he'll commit everything. And I pull the overhang. And they're done. Silas stared at her. You're the bait. Yes. If one of them gets to you before the overhang, then you come for me. She held his gaze without a flicker. That's the part you do. I handle the north run. You handle the mountain. And then you come for me. He held her gaze for a long time. Long enough that the fire popped and the shadows shifted, and the wind moved along the roof in a low, continuous sound. I don't like this, he said. I didn't ask if you liked it. Evelyn, Silas, her voice dropped, not softer, closer, something in it that wasn't about tactics or planning. I have been running for 14 months. I am done running. This is the last time. I need you to trust that I know what I'm capable of. I know what you're capable of, he said. That's not what I'm worried about. She went still for a moment. Really still. The way she went still when something got through the careful outer layer. What are you worried about? She asked. He looked at her across the firelight. At the woman who had shown up at his door 4 hours before the first snow with a locked trunk and no warmth and 3 pistols and 14 months of survival worn into every line of her. Who had sat at his table and told him the truth about his brother's child? Who had bluffed a Pinkerton man with nothing but nerve? Who had looked at Noah every single morning with an expression she didn't know she was making that said, "You are the reason I kept going." I'm worried about after, he said. She frowned. After tonight. After Holden. After the documents reach a federal court and the senator is finished and Noah is safe. He held her gaze steadily. I'm worried you'll decide the running is over, but the staying is too hard, and you'll go. The fire between them cracked and settled. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was very quiet and very direct, which was the only way she said the things she meant most. I've been looking for somewhere that was worth stopping, she said. I haven't found it in 14 months. A pause. I might have found it now. Silas looked at her for one more long moment. Then he stood up, picked up the rifle, and checked the load one final time. "Then let's make sure we both get to find out," he said. She stood up too, pulled on her coat, checked her pistols with those fast, certain hands. Looked at the back room door once, just once, the briefest glance the kind a person takes when they're trying to carry something with them without being slowed down by it. "When I'm clear of the cabin," she said, "give me 4 minutes, then do what needs doing." 4 minutes, he said. She pulled open the door. Outside was dark and cold, and full of men who wanted to end this. She walked into it without hesitating. And Silas Reed, who had spent 11 years learning to live without anything worth losing, moved toward the mountain with something in his chest that felt terrifyingly, unmistakably like the beginning of having everything to lose. 4 minutes. Silas counted them the way a man counts when he's trying not to think about what's happening outside those 4 minutes, mechanically, relentlessly, 1 second pressed against the next. He was already moving up the ridge behind the cabin, using the dark and the snow, and 11 years of knowing exactly where to put his feet on this mountain without making a sound. Below him and to the north, he heard exactly what he needed to hear. Voices. Urgent. Redirecting. They'd seen her. He pushed harder up the slope. The overhang was a natural formation, a shelf of packed snow and ice that had been building weight through 2 weeks of heavy snowfall, hanging over the north approach like a held breath. Silas had looked at it the morning after he'd found the tracks and understood what the mountain was offering. All it needed was the right vibration, the right point of impact. He had the rifle. He had 1 shot to get it right. He reached the position above the shelf and went flat, scanning below. Through the dark, he could make out movement. 4 of Holden's men pushing north along the approach corridor, exactly as Evelyn had predicted, spread out, but committed, all of them focused forward on whatever they could see of her moving ahead of them. 4. He counted again. 4. Which meant Holden was the 5th, and Holden was somewhere else. The cold certainty of that hit him hard. Holden hadn't committed. Holden had sent his men north and gone a different direction because Holden was exactly what Evelyn had described: methodical, experienced, never putting all his weight on one plan. He'd seen the bait and recognized it, and he'd split, and he was heading for the cabin right now, while every other eye was pointed north. Noah. Silas made the decision in less than a second. He fired. The shot hit the fracture point in the ice shelf with a crack that came back off the ridge like a second shot. And then the mountain answered, not dramatically, not like an explosion, but with a deep, grinding inevitability. A mass of packed snow releasing from the cliff face and coming down across the north approach in a wall of white that swallowed the corridor and everything in it. He was already moving back down before the echo finished. Evelyn heard the overhang come down behind her and didn't stop running. She'd been counting on the sound. She'd been counting on the confusion it would cause, the temporary blindness of that much snow displacement, the 2 or 3 seconds when every man in that corridor would have his instincts overwhelmed and his attention pulled backward. She'd used those seconds to change direction, cut east, and push hard toward the tree line above the cabin. She got there in time to see Holden coming through the back. He was alone and moving fast. Rifle up, heading directly for the cabin's rear wall, the side without windows. The side you approached when you wanted to get to a door without being seen from inside. She had 50 yards on him. She ran them. He heard her at 30. Turned. The rifle came up, and she dropped to the ground before it leveled, hitting the snow hard on her shoulder, and rolling, and the shot went over her, and she was back on her feet in the same motion, pistol drawn. "Don't," she said. He stopped. They stood 10 yards apart in the dark, his rifle against her pistol. Her advantage was that at 10 yards the pistol was faster. His advantage was that he had the longer weapon and she'd just hit the ground and her hands were full of cold. Neither of them fired. "The documents," Holden said. He wasn't breathing hard. That was the most unnerving thing about him, even now. Even with the overhang sound still rolling off the ridges, he was composed. Professional to the last degree. "Where are they?" "Safe," she said. "I need them." "I know you do." She kept the pistol level. Her shoulder was screaming from the fall, but her hands were steady. "Your men on the north approach. I heard." His jaw tightened fractionally. That was all. "Where are the documents?" "James Holden." She said his name deliberately, the way she'd used it outside the cabin the night before, making it specific, making it personal. "I know what the senator promised you. I know what he'll do to you if this gets to a federal court and your name is in those files." She watched his face. "He'll give you up. You know that. You've known it for a while. A man like Kane doesn't go down alone." Something moved in Holden's expression. Just briefly, just enough. "You'd say anything right now," he said. "I would," she agreed. "But I'm not. There's a letter from Kane to Pruitt dated April 1885 that names you specifically regarding the Colorado operation. You were Insurance Mr. Holden. You were put in writing so that if it ever came apart, there was someone to hand to the authorities who wasn't the senator." The rifle didn't drop, but his breathing changed. "You can walk away," she said. "Tonight. I won't include the letter in what I send to the federal court unless they ask for it specifically. You leave, I don't go looking for you." She held his gaze. "But if you come through that door, everything goes. Every page, every name, including yours." Holden looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the cabin door. He looked back at her. "You'll testify to the senator's involvement," he said slowly. "Directly." "Yes. The land clearances, the murders, all of it. And the child stays on the mountain." It wasn't a question, more like a man recalculating the weight of something. "He's Thomas Reed's son," Evelyn said. "He's home." A long silence. The cold pressed in from all directions. Somewhere up on the ridge, the last of the overhang was settling, a low, grinding sound that faded into the mountain. "The letter," Holden said, "goes to the court only if they come looking for it." She paused. "I keep my word, Mr. Holden. Ask anyone who's trusted me." He lowered the rifle by 2 inches, then 4. Then he let it hang at his side. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "what kind of man you're up against." "I've been up against him for 14 months, she said. "I have a very precise idea." Holden looked at the ground. Something passed through him, not regret exactly. Something older and more tired than regret. The expression of a man who had made too many choices in one direction and had reached the point where the road back was longer than the road forward, and both of them ended somewhere he didn't want to be. He turned and walked back into the dark. She stood there for 10 more seconds, pistol still up, making sure he kept walking. He did. She lowered the pistol and realized her legs were shaking. The cabin door opened before she reached it, and Silas came through, fast rifle up, scanning past her. "Where's Bay gone?" she said. He stopped scanning, looked at her, took in the snow on her coat, the shoulder she was favoring, the controlled way she was breathing. "Are you hit?" "No, I fell." She pushed past him into the warmth. "The north approach." "Covered." He followed her inside and barred the door. 4 men. The corridor's buried." He paused. "I don't know about the men." "They had time to run," she said. "They heard it starting." She said it like she needed it to be true, and he let it stand, because there was nothing either of them could do about it now, and the night wasn't finished. She went straight to the back room door and opened it. "Noah?" Silence for a moment, then the sound of the wall panel moving. Noah came out from his hide space with Captain tucked under his arm and snow dust from the panel frame in his hair. He walked to Evelyn and stopped in front of her and looked up at her face with those serious dark eyes, checking her the way he always checked her, methodically, completely. "You're hurt," he said. "My shoulder. It's fine." He considered this. Then, with a deliberateness that made it clearly a decision and not an impulse, he stepped forward and put his arms around her waist. Evelyn went still. It took her a moment, a long, raw moment, before her arms came up and went around him. When they did, she held on with the careful fierceness of someone who'd spent 14 months holding this child's life together from the outside and had never let herself have this. Silas stood in the doorway and looked at the wall. After a moment, Noah pulled back and looked at Silas. "You came back," he said. "Told you I would." "Evelyn said you would too." Silas looked at Evelyn over the boy's head. She was looking at the floor, and there was something on her face that she wasn't completely managing, something open and unguarded that had slipped through in the aftermath of everything. "She was right," Silas said. Noah nodded, satisfied. "I'm hungry," he said. Silas almost laughed. He actually might have. "Yeah," he said. "I'll make something." They sat around the table an hour later, biscuits, dried meat, coffee that Evelyn drank in both hands, and the silence between them was a different kind than any silence the cabin had held before. Not the careful silence of strangers, not the watchful silence of people waiting for danger. Just the quiet of three people who had been through something together and were still there on the other side of it. Noah fell asleep at the table again, the same way he always did. Head on his folded arms, rabbit tucked close, dropping off between one breath and the next, with the absolute trust of a child who had finally, after a long time, decided he was somewhere safe enough to let his guard down completely. Silas and Evelyn sat across from each other and didn't speak for a long while. "Holden," Silas said eventually. "He'll disappear." She was looking at the grain of the table. "Men like him know how. He's been in this business long enough that he has an exit somewhere. He'll use it." "And the senator," she looked up. "The documents go out with the first thaw. I know a federal judge in Helena, not personally, but through the pastor in Billings who vouched for me. He's honest. Old school honest, the kind that isn't for sale." She paused. "What I have is enough. It was always enough. I just needed to live long enough to deliver it." "You needed to get here," he said. "Yes." She met his eyes. "I needed to get here." The fire settled. Noah breathed steadily between them. "My shoulder needs looking at," she said, after a moment, practical again. "I think I may have cracked something. It's not getting better." He got up and brought the medical kit without being asked. She shrugged out of her coat on her own, then the top layer of her dress, and Silas checked the joint with careful hands, the same careful hands he used on the horses when something was wrong. Feeling for what was broken versus what was only damaged. "Cracked rib," he said. "Not broken. Still going to hurt for 3 weeks." "It already hurts." "I know." He wrapped it steadily, and she didn't make a sound, just held herself straight and breathed in even pulls. When he was done, she stayed still for a moment, with her back to him, looking at the far wall. "Silas!" "Yeah." "What you said before I went out." She didn't turn around. "About after. About being worried I'd leave." He didn't answer. He waited. "I've never stayed anywhere voluntarily," she said. "Not in my adult life. Every place I stopped was because I had to, and every place I left was because I had to. I don't know if I know how to stay when I don't have to." She paused. "I just think you should know that about me, before you decide what you want." He looked at the back of her head, at the dark hair that was usually pinned back severely and had come half loose through the night, at the particular way she held her spine even when she was exhausted and hurt and raw, not stiffness exactly, but a kind of structural honesty. Like she couldn't be anything other than what she was, and she knew it, and she was telling him, so he couldn't say she'd hidden it. "I know that about you," he said. She turned around, looked at him. "It doesn't change anything," he said. "It should." "Why?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because staying is harder than running. Running, I know. I'm very good at it. Staying means something can be taken from you." "Yes," he said simply. "It does." She held his gaze. "But you're already worried about losing it," he said. "So the damage is done." Something shifted in her face, the last of the controlled exterior giving way to something that wasn't grief and wasn't relief, but lived in the territory between them. Something that had been building since the night she'd sat down across from him and told him the truth about his brother's child. Maybe before that. Maybe since the moment she'd looked at him from that wagon and calculated odds and found against everything that he might be someone worth gambling on. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Between them, Noah slept on, breathing slow, and even Captain tucked under his chin. The dawn came, the way dawn always comes in the Bitterroot Mountains. In deep winter, slowly, grudgingly light, pressing through gray cloud cover, with all the enthusiasm of something that knows it won't last long. Silas went out at first light to check the north corridor. It was buried completely. The approach was gone under 8 feet of packed snow, exactly as he'd planned. He stood at the edge of it and looked at the white silence for a long time. He found no bodies in the corridor. He'd been right. They'd heard it starting and run. He tracked the retreating prints for a quarter-mile into the lower forest found where they'd met horses and followed the trail far enough to be certain. They were off the mountain, moving fast. He went back to the cabin. Evelyn was at the stove, moving carefully with her shoulder, but refusing to move slowly. Noah was at the table, drawing something with a stick of charcoal on a flat piece of bark. His own paper self-made a habit Evelyn said he'd developed on the road when there was nothing else. Silas hung his coat and sat down. Noah slid the bark across the table. It was a rough drawing. 5-year-old hand's charcoal bark. It wasn't detailed, but it was clear enough. 3 figures in front of a rectangle that was obviously the cabin. One tall, one smaller, one very small, with what appeared to be a rabbit. "That's us," Noah said. Silas looked at it. "Captain looks a little large," Silas said. "Captain is important," Noah said, as if this explained the scale. Silas turned the drawing over in his hands, felt the weight of it, which was almost nothing, just bark and charcoal, but was also somehow the heaviest thing he'd held in 11 years. He set it down carefully in front of him. "You can keep it," Noah said. "I'll make another one." "I'll keep it," Silas said. Evelyn set a plate on the table and caught a glimpse of the drawing. She looked at it for one unguarded second, that same stripped expression she got when something got all the way through. Then she turned back to the stove. "Eat," she said. "Both of you." Silas picked up his fork. Outside, the mountain was silent. The storm had passed in the night, used itself up, left behind a stillness that felt different from the stillness before, not held breath, not waiting. Just quiet. The real kind. But somewhere below, past the buried north corridor, and down the long road that wouldn't open for months, there was still a senator in a large house in Virginia who had not yet heard what had happened on this mountain, who still believed that James Holden was going to solve his problem cleanly and quietly, the way he always had, who still believed that the documents were findable, the woman was catchable, and the child was irrelevant to anything except optics. Senator Aldrich Kane did not yet know that the mountain had made its decision. He did not yet know that the evidence he'd spent 3 years hunting was sitting under a floorboard, 30 feet above a braided rug in a cabin on a ridge he'd never heard of. In the care of a mountain man, he'd never considered, protected by a woman he'd underestimated from the very first moment she'd worked in his house, and he'd looked through her the way powerful men look through people they've decided don't matter. He would find out. Spring was coming, and when the road opened, everything that had been buried on this mountain was going to come down like the overhang. Not violent exactly, but with the same grinding, inevitable weight of something that had been building for a very long time and finally had nowhere left to hold. Silas looked at the drawing in front of him, at the 3 rough figures, at the rectangle that was this cabin, this place, this improbable thing that had assembled itself out of desperation and necessity, and the particular stubbornness of people who refused to be finished. He looked at Noah, eating with both hands. He looked at Evelyn's back, the careful way she was holding her injured shoulder, the way she'd already started reorganizing the kitchen for what came next, because she was always thinking about what came next. And Silas Reed, who had told himself for 11 years that a man alone on a mountain had everything he needed and nothing left to want, picked up his fork and ate breakfast with his family. For the first time in a very long time, the cabin was warm all the way through. The road opened on the 14th of March. Silas knew it the morning it happened, not because he checked it, but because the mountain told him. There was a particular sound to the lower slopes when the freeze broke a slow creak and shift that traveled up through the rock and into the cabin floor, and he'd heard it every spring for 11 years. He was already at the table with the oilskin package of documents in front of him when Evelyn came out of the bedroom. She looked at the package, then at him. Today. She sat down. Noah was still asleep. He'd taken to sleeping late in the mornings, now that he'd decided the cabin was permanent, spreading out in the warmth, with Captain tucked under his chin, like a child who had finally run out of reasons to stay alert. "I should be the one to go," Evelyn said. "No." "Silas, you're the witness. You're the testimony. You are the single most important person in this chain of evidence, and I'm not putting you on a mountain road alone 3 days after the thaw with the document package under your arm." He held her gaze steadily. "I'll go. I'll take it to the pastor in Billings. He contacts the judge in Helena. That's the chain you described. And if something happens on the road, then I'm a mountain man on his own road and nobody's looking for me." He paused. "They're looking for you. They've always been looking for you. The moment you ride down that mountain with those papers, you become visible again. I don't want you visible yet." She looked at him for a long time. He could see her working through at every angle, every counter-argument, the deep-seated resistance of a woman who had carried this alone for so long that handing any piece of it to someone else felt like a structural failure. "I trust you," she said finally. Like she was identifying the specific thing that made it possible. "I know," he said. "That's why it works." She pushed back from the table. "Then go before I talk myself out of it." He almost smiled. "Better bitch." He was 2 hours down the mountain when he saw the riders coming up. 3 of them, moving deliberately, not fast. One of them was carrying something a satchel document style. They were on the main road, not cutting through. Official movement. Silas stopped his horse and waited. The man in front raised a hand, open palm, not a weapon. As they got closer, Silas could see the badge on his coat. Federal Marshal. And beside him, riding with the particular careful posture of a man trying to look like he was there voluntarily and mostly succeeding, James Holden. Silas kept his hand near his rifle and didn't move. Holden pulled up 20 feet away. He looked different from the last time, not smaller exactly, but reduced somehow. Like something he'd been carrying had been set down, and without its weight, he was just a man. An ordinary, tired, middle-aged man who'd spent too many years doing work he'd stopped believing in. "Reed," Holden said. "Holden," the marshal spoke. "Thomas Graves, United States Federal Marshal, Helena office. I'm looking for a woman named Evelyn Vale and a document package relating to Senator Aldrich Kane of Virginia." He paused. "We're not here to arrest anyone." "Then why are you here?" Marshal Graves reached into the satchel. He pulled out a folded paper and held it out. "Mr. Holden came to my office 11 days ago. He provided sworn testimony regarding Senator Kane's operations in the Western Territories, including the land clearances and the murders of immigrant settlers between 1879 and 1886. He paused to let that land. He also provided documentation supporting those claims. We have enough to open a federal investigation and issue an arrest warrant for Kane." He held Silas's gaze. "What we need from Mrs. Vale is corroborating testimony, not to build the case is built. To seal it so completely that Kane's attorneys can't find a single thread to pull." Silas looked at Holden. Holden met his eyes without looking away. "I told you the senator would give me up," he said. "I didn't wait for him to do it first." "You went to the marshal." 11 days ago, the morning after I left this mountain." A pause. "I've been in this business long enough to know when a structure is coming down. I picked which side to be standing on when it did." "And your men, the north approach." "Alive," Holden said. "They made it out of the corridor." He paused. "Lucky men." Silas held the marshal's gaze for a long moment. He'd spent 11 years reading the mountain, reading what was solid, what was rotten, what would hold weight, and what would give way without warning. He read men the same way. He looked at Thomas Graves and found what he was looking for. "She'll want to hear this herself," Silas said. "We figured," said Graves. Silas turned his horse back up the mountain. "Datan." Evelyn heard hoofbeats and was at the window before the sound fully registered. She had both pistols on the table in front of her and Noah in the back room with the panel pulled shut before the riders came into view. When she saw Silas at the front of the group, she felt her shoulders drop by approximately 3 inches. When she saw who was behind him, they came back up. Silas knocked once. "It's me, and we have company." She opened the door with one pistol still in her hand. Holden looked at it. "Fair enough," he said. She looked at the marshal's badge, then at Holden's face. Then at Silas, who gave her the smallest nod. "Not everything is fine exactly, but I've read this and it's real." She stepped back from the door. They came inside. She stayed near the table with the pistol at her side while Marshal Graves laid out everything. The testimony, the warrant, the case, as it stood, the corroboration they needed. She listened without interrupting, without expression. The way she listened to everything important completely, and with the part of her mind that was always checking for the trap. There was no trap. When Graves finished, she looked at Holden. "You went to Helena." "Yes." "Before Cain could move against you." "Yes." "The letter. The one I threatened you with." "He'd already written a second one," Holden said flatly. "Different wording, same intent. I found it in my own files when I got back to town." Something cold moved through his expression. He was going to hand me to a local prosecutor and call me a rogue operative if anything came apart. 11 years I worked for that man. He paused. I was done. Evelyn looked at the marshal. "What happens to the senator? Arrest warrants been issued out of Helena. Marshals in Virginia executed." Graves paused. "It'll be a significant trial. Federal. His attorneys will fight, but with what Mr. Holden provided and what you have." He looked at the oilskin package that Silas had set on the table. "There is no fighting that. The man goes to prison, Mrs. Vale, not local jail. Federal prison, which is where men like him go when the whole machine catches up to them." She was quiet for a moment. "The land," she said. "The settlers, the families." "That's a longer fight," Graves said honestly. "The land grants have to be challenged through the courts. Some of those families have been gone for years, some of them scattered." He paused. "But the record exists now. It's official. It can be used." He met her eyes. "You made it possible for it to exist. That's not nothing." She looked at the window for a long moment. 341 people, she said quietly. "Yes. I want their names in the record. Not just the senator's crimes, their names." "I'll make sure of it personally," Graves said. She nodded once, went to the back room, opened the panel. Noah came out and stopped when he saw the room full of strangers. He looked at Evelyn. She crouched down in front of him. "Do you remember what I told you about the judge?" she said. "The honest one." "Yes. These men work for him. They're here to help." She held his gaze. "It's almost finished, sweetheart. The running. It's almost done." Noah looked at the marshal, at Holden, at Silas standing by the door. "Is it really finished?" he asked Silas. "Getting there," Silas said. "Last stretch." Noah considered this with his usual gravity. Then he looked at Holden directly. Children have no diplomatic instincts, and Noah had less than most. "You were trying to hurt us," he said. Holden absorbed this without flinching. "Yes. But you changed." "Yes." Noah seemed to accept this as a complete accounting. "Okay," he said, and went to sit at the table with Captain. Holden looked at the rabbit, then at Silas. Something moved in his face that might have been the ghost of something human he hadn't used in a long time. Evelyn rode down with the marshal 2 days later to give her formal testimony in Billings. She and Silas stood outside the cabin the morning she left Noah inside, eating breakfast, with the studied indifference of a child who had been told goodbyes were temporary and was choosing to believe it. 4 days, Evelyn said. 5 at most. All right. She had the document package in her saddlebag. The original, complete nothing removed. She'd checked it twice and then checked it again, not because she doubted anything, but because 14 months of running had built habits that didn't disappear overnight. When I get back, she started. You don't have to plan it out, he said. She looked at him. I do. I plan things. It's how I function. Then plan it out. She paused. The morning light was sharp and cold, and the snow was melting off the porch roof in slow drips. When I get back, I'd like to stay. Good. I mean permanently. I know what you mean. Silas. She looked at him steadily. I'm not good at this. I want to be clear about that. I'm not warm naturally. I don't have the instinct for it that some women have. I'll probably be frustrating. Probably, he agreed. And I need you not to make promises I have to keep track of, she said. I have enough to keep track of. I'll try, he said. She studied his face. He was absolutely serious and absolutely calm, the way he always was, that deep, grounded steadiness that had been the first thing she'd cataloged about him, and the thing she'd kept coming back to in every calculation since. Not passive, not dull, just fully, solidly present, like a man who had made his peace with the weight of things. You're not going to tell me you love me, she said. Not a complaint, an observation. Not standing in a cold yard with your horse waiting, he said. No. Something that was almost a smile touched the corner of her mouth. Noted. She swung up into the saddle, looked down at him. Noah needs new boots, she said. The left one's wearing through. I'll see to it. He also won't eat turnips regardless of how you prepare them. Don't waste the effort. Duly noted. And he talks in his sleep sometimes. Not distressed, just talks. Don't wake him. He goes back down on his own. Evelyn, she stopped. He'll be here when you get back, Silas said. So will I. She looked at him for one long moment with that stripped open expression she never fully controlled. I know, she said. And rode. She was gone 4 days. On the first day, Noah asked once where she was, accepted the answer, and went back to whatever he was doing. On the second day, he didn't ask. On the third day, Silas came in from checking the trap lines to find Noah sitting in Silas's chair near the fire with Captain in his lap, looking at the door with the patient, serious expression of a child who had learned long ago that wanting someone back didn't make them come back faster. Silas sat down across from him. She'll be back tomorrow, day after at most. I know, Noah said. She always comes back. Yes, Silas said. She does. Noah looked at the fire. Before, when we were running, sometimes I'd wake up and she'd be outside and I couldn't hear her, and I'd think... He stopped. I'd think maybe this was the time she didn't. Silas was quiet. But she always did, Noah said. Every time. He looked at Silas with those eyes that held too much. She came back every time, even when I could tell it was hard, even when she was really tired, and I knew she wanted to just... He stopped again, searching for the word. Stop. She never stopped, Silas said. No. Noah tucked Captain more firmly under his arm. I'm going to remember that, he said. When I'm older, I'm going to remember that she never stopped. Silas looked at his nephew Thomas's son, this small, serious person who had been born into someone else's ugliness, and carried through it by sheer love, and felt the particular weight of everything that had led to this chair, this fire, this conversation. You should, Silas said. That's worth remembering. Noah nodded, looked back at the fire. Silas? Yeah. Can I call you Uncle Silas? It hit him somewhere deep and clean. Yeah, he said. You can. Noah seemed satisfied. He leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes, and was asleep in 2 minutes with Captain on his chest and the firelight moving across his face. Silas sat there for a long time and watched his brother's son sleep. Evelyn came back on the fourth day. She came in fast, tied the horse herself, and pushed through the door already talking. "It's done. Graves has the documents. Full deposition given and witnessed federal seal copy lodged with the court in Helena." She pulled off her coat. "Kane's attorneys filed an injunction in Virginia this morning, which Graves said was expected and which will fail inside 30 days. The arrest warrant is active." She looked at Silas. "He doesn't know yet how complete it is. When he finds out, he'll know it's over," Silas said. "Yes." She stopped, looked around the cabin. "Where's Noah?" "Back room, drawing." She exhaled slowly. All the forward momentum she'd carried through the door settled and went still. She stood in the middle of the cabin for a moment with her hands loose at her sides, not planning anything, not checking anything, not calculating the next move. Just standing, in a warm cabin, finished. The back room door opened, and Noah came out with a piece of bark in his hand. He walked to Evelyn, stopped in front of her, and held it up. It was a drawing. Rough charcoal child's hands. 2 figures this time, one tall, one small. Standing next to each other. Below them, in careful, uneven letters that he'd clearly practiced, "Me and Evelyn." Home. She took it. She looked at it for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were bright in a way she made no effort to conceal. "When did you learn to write that?" "Uncle Silas taught me," Noah said. "While you were gone." She looked at Silas over the boy's head. He was looking at the wall again. She crouched down in front of Noah. "It's perfect," she said. "I made one for Uncle Silas too," Noah said. "His has 3 people on it." She looked at Silas. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a piece of bark without a word, and held it up briefly, then put it back. She stood up, looked at him. He looked back at her with that calm, steady, fully present gaze that she'd catalogued the first night and never stopped returning to. "I told you I'd be back," she said. "You did." "I'm going to keep doing that," she said, "coming back." "I know. I need you to know it's a decision, not a habit, not an accident." She held his gaze. "Every time it's going to be a decision, and it's going to be the same one." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Me too." Noah looked between them with the expression of a child who understood that something important had just been agreed to and was choosing not to make it strange by commenting on it. "Are we eating soon?" he asked. Silas looked at him. "Yeah, we're eating soon." "Good." Noah went back to the table and sat down. "I'm very hungry. I've been very patient." Evelyn made a sound that was definitely, unmistakably a laugh, small and surprised and real, the kind that comes out before a person decides whether to allow it. It lasted only a second, but it filled the cabin completely. Senator Aldrich Kane was arrested at his Virginia estate on the 22nd of April, 1888. The newspapers called it the most significant federal prosecution of a sitting senator in 30 years. The evidence was described as overwhelming. His attorneys requested 3 postponements. Each was denied. The trial lasted 6 weeks and the verdict came back in an afternoon. Evelyn read about it in a letter from Marshal Graves that arrived in Billings in early June, which Pastor Elwood brought up the mountain on his spring visit, with the self-satisfied expression of a man who had made one very good decision in the middle of winter and was now watching the consequences of it unfold into something far larger than he'd imagined. She read the letter at the table. Silas watched her face. Noah watched her face. She folded it when she was done and set it in the center of the table. "He's going to prison," she said. "How long?" Silas asked. "Life." She pressed her hands flat on the table. "They found more than what I had. Other people came forward once Holden testified." It opened a door. She paused. 341 names are in the federal record. Official. Permanent. She looked at the table for a long moment. "They can't be erased now." Noah had been listening. "Is it really over?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It's really over." He nodded slowly. Then he got up, went to the corner where the iron trunk still sat. They'd kept it, neither of them had discussed throwing it out, and opened the lid. He reached inside, pulled out the small folded blanket he'd slept on for 14 months, and tucked it under his arm alongside Captain. "I want to keep this," he said. "You can keep it," Evelyn said. "I don't want to sleep in it anymore, but I want to keep it." He looked at her directly. "So I remember what it was like before. So the now feels like what it is." Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Elwood, still in the corner with his coffee, had the expression of a man who was going to be telling this story for the rest of his life. Silas stood up, went to the window, and looked out at the spring mountain, the snow pulling back from the tree line, the mud of the lower slopes, the particular pale green of the first growth working up through the ground in the places the sun hit longest. 11 springs he'd watched this mountain come back. This one looked different from the inside. He heard Evelyn come to stand beside him. They stood there together without touching, looking at the same mountain they'd been looking at all winter from different distances, and in the silence between them was everything they'd said, and everything they hadn't said yet, and everything they still had time to say. "It needs a bigger table," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "What?" "The cabin. If Elwood keeps visiting and Noah keeps growing, we need a bigger table." She paused. "And the south wall could come out another 4 feet. There's room." Silas looked at the south wall. "There is room." "I know how to work timber," she said. "Learned it in Nebraska 1884 when I couldn't afford to pay anyone and the barn was falling in." She glanced at him. "I'm useful, remember?" "I remember," he said. "Good." She looked back at the window. "So we'll do the wall in the fall, before the first snow." "Sounds right," he said. Outside, Noah had gone to the porch and was calling back something to Elwood about Captain's full name and the history of his bravery, speaking with the open, easy confidence of a child who had stopped measuring the space around him for danger and started filling it with himself instead. Silas listened to him talk and felt the whole long weight of the winter settle into something it had been building toward since the evening a pastor showed up at his door 30 minutes before dark with a woman who wouldn't look at his cabin. He'd spent 11 years alone on this mountain and built something solid out of the solitude, a life that worked, that sustained itself, that asked nothing of anyone and gave nothing back. He'd told himself it was enough. He'd told himself a man who'd lost everything learned to need nothing. He'd been wrong, not about the loss. The loss was real and always would be. But he'd been wrong about what came after, about whether the after was finished, or whether it was just waiting patient as the mountain itself for the right winter. For a locked trunk, for a child with a rabbit, for a woman who ran across half the country, not to escape, but to deliver the truth to the one place on the map that was hard enough to protect it. Evelyn hadn't come to his mountain looking for love, but love had been exactly what the mountain had to offer. And on a spring morning in 1888, with a senator in federal custody and a 5-year-old boy explaining the concept of bravery to a bewildered pastor on the porch, Silas Reed stood at the window of his own home and understood simply and completely, and without any need to say it out loud, that the life he'd thought was finished had not finished at all. It had only just found where it belonged.